Have you ever wanted to add special touches to your heirloom sewing projects inside and out? Well, for the outside, scallops can be large or small as they skip along the edges of hems, collars, sleeves, and bodice insets, giving visual interest to those normally straight, predictable edges. On the inside, we'll share secrets about making a lining the easy way. We have an antique embroidery technique adapted for the machine and a most unusual hand embroidery technique. I'm so glad you've come to my sewing room today. Let's get started. I'm so happy to have as my guest today Lezette Thomason. Lezette is the owner of Children's Corner Patterns. Lezette, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. Today I want to tell you about the straight stitch scallop. That is a stitch that is on your sewing machine that is used to make this Peter Pan collar and these little tiny sleeves. And now I want to show you how to do it. The straight stitch scallop on your sewing machine looks like this on these two pieces. This is a sleeve, this is a collar. You would cut out your regular Peter Pan collar and you would put in this stitch on your sewing machine. You would adjust your stitch length so that your scallop is 3/4 to 1 inch long and adjust your stitch width so that your scallop is about a 1/2 inch wide. Now, if you are using a 5mm machine, you can use the edge of your foot right on the raw edge of your collar. If you are using a 9mm sewing machine where you've got a wide foot, you might want to cut your collar about 1/8 of an inch wider around the edge, and that way you can use the edge of that foot right on the raw edge. It makes sewing so much easier. So your technique is just to put in your stitch and adjust stitch length and width, then to put the edge of your foot on your raw edge and just sew. Do not watch what you're doing, it'll mess up. Just keep the edge of your foot on the raw edge of your fabric. Do this on the collar and on the sleeve. Then trim to 1/8 inch. If you're using a finely woven, tightly woven fabric, you will clip at the points. If you are using, this one's been trimmed also. If you're using a loose woven fabric like a linen, you do not need to clip the points. I have a dress in progress here that shows the collar finished, pinned to the dress, and one sleeve already sewn in. Now I'm going to use this same stitch to show you a different technique. Now, this time we're going to use our straight stitch scallop to do machine shadow work. On this little yoke sundress, which goes down into a V in the back, with a gathered skirt, I have used blue thread to create a shadow with a twin needle and our scallop stitch. On the other dress, this is just a little A-line dress that buttons in the back, and it has a yoke overlay. Again, I've used the straight stitch scallop to create machine shadow work. And now I'm going to show you how to do that. But first, let me show you the embellishments. After I did the scallops, the machine shadow work scallops, this has hand embroidery, and the other one has tiny buttons sewn on with a colored thread. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you how to do the one with the overlay. You need a pattern for an overlay. This is very simple. Follow the outside, and then you will see the bottom curve. Take that pattern and lay it on your fabric. But first you need to stabilize your fabric. Now, on shadow work, you cannot use a stabilizer that will tear away because then your pretty shadow work won't show. So we're going to use starch as an stabilizer, and the starch needs to be done lightly, iron. Lightly on the other side, iron. Lightly, do this like 8 or 10 times to get your fabric stiff. Then lay your pattern on and trace around the edge of it. After you have traced around the edge of it, then you're going to turn it over and move your pattern and trace on that side. Then the next thing we need to do is to come up and we need to mark a line where we're going to use as a reference point for our scallop. You can see here I'm drawing a line 1/2 inch up from my edge of my fabric. And I've done this by dots. I will continue this all the way across until I have a line across. Then, just like we did on the collar, set the edge of your presser foot right on the line that you have drawn and start stitching, keeping the raw edge of your foot on that line, and that will put the scallops just where you need them in order to sew a seam allowance at the bottom and have perfectly placed shadow stitch scallops.
Oh, Lezette, thank you so much. What fascinating techniques.
This is a really fun thing to do.
And now Lezette has some sewing inspirations to share with you. Lezette, tell us about this.
Well, Martha, you know, a lot of women like to sew for their children, but sometimes those children are a little picky about what they wear. So let's update our wardrobe. All little girls like skirts, and this is such a cute skirt here, cargo pockets trimmed in rickrack. And to go with that, a little piqué top, and this is just made out of a dress pattern cut off short for the top. Wonderful to pick up a skirt color in a monogram or a name.
Adorable.
Again, this is a similar thing. We have taken another dress pattern, cut it off short to make a cute top, added a pocket that can have a monogram on it. And you know what? When it goes to a different child, rip that pocket off, make another one, and have a different monogram.
Or go ahead and put the monogram on when you make the first one.
That's right. And then this one is paired with just a little pull-on capri pants trimmed with a gingham.
And this adorable little dress.
This is an old pattern that actually had the V in the back. We took the yokes, turned them around, did a little redrafting on them, and then made it A-line into a wrap dress. And the little girls just love this.
Well, it's so cute. Little shells. That looks like a summer beach trip, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And then this is just so sweet for that little toddler, just the first little applique dress. And what I want you to look at here is using your colored buttons to put one on top of the other and put them on with a different color of floss to make cute flowers.
There is nothing any cuter than applique and these wonderful little fabrics. Lezette, thank you so much. And now Lezette has some more fabulous construction tips to share with you. Lezette, I cannot wait to see what you're going to share today.
Martha, I'm going to tell you how to do a side seam in a lined garment.
Okay.
I think you will notice on this garment that it is completely finished except for the sides. The top neckline is finished, the piped little ruffles, even the buttons and buttonholes are done. But the side seams are still open. And that's what we're going to learn how to do. So, I'm going to take my garment and turn it so that the nice fabric is on the inside and we're looking at the lining. And I'm going to put those side seams together, matching the raw edges, just like that. Now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to separate our garment fabric and let my lining fabric hang loose. Now I'm at the bottom of my dress. I'm going to match my seam at the bottom edge, and I'm going to put a pin there. And then I'm going to move up to my underarm seam and put a pin there, just like that. And then I'm going to pin it in between. Now let me show you that again. It's a little tricky. Okay, we're going to have our garment side seams. We're going to put right sides of the nice dress fabric together, so we're looking at the lining. Take your fingers and separate out the garment lining from the fabric lining and let the fabric lining hang loose. Then pin it together at the bottom seam, at the underarm seam, all in between, and then go a little further into the lining and pin some more. Just pin a couple of inches there. Now I have one pinned for you to see right here. I have a pin in the lining, I have my side garment fabric pinned, and a little bit more. So now I would sew that area, tuck it back in, and after I did that, I would have one side seam completed except for that tiny little bit in the lining. To sew that part, I would reach through the opening and grab that section, pull it out that is unsewn, and that would be my lining. And I would then put those raw edges of the lining together and sew that section and then push it back in. I would do the other side the exact same way and push it back in and then hand whip the opening closed. Now, because you can't get in there to press those seams open, what you would do would be just to maneuver them to one side or the other and press them all just in one direction.
Lezette, thank you so very much for this. The lining, I think the lining just finishes any garment to make it lined fully, don't you?
Martha. And they wash so much better.
Oh, well, and they just look so pretty. Thank you so much, Lezette. And now we have an antique technique to share with you. I recently received a letter from a lady that had been getting my email newsletter, and she wrote, "Martha, I have several baby things and my family will just throw them away, and I just wondered if I could send them to you for you to take care of and share with the world." This beautiful baby coat was one of the pieces. Of course, I told her I would love to have them. I cannot wait to share this with you. Look at the magnificent collar with the scallops and the embroidery, but this is the technique I want to share with you today. You know, I've been all over the world looking for these beautiful antiques, and this one just came in a box. These are release tucks with a feather stitch on top of it. I just think that is the prettiest technique. Then the feather stitches go all the way down the front of this glorious baby coat. The feather stitching goes all the way around, and look, the hem is even hemmed with feather stitching. Now, all of this work was done by hand, but we can reproduce these techniques today by machine. And these released tucks with the feather stitch on top of the tucks is what I would like to share with you today. Isn't that pretty? The little ecru, and you know what, with our machine embroidery, you can even do a machine embroidered collar and do your scallops on the machine also. Let's just see how easy it is to make those tucks. First of all, to make any kind of tucks, those are release tucks, you need to mark and have the lines so far apart, however wide you want your tucks to be. Then what we do is we fold on one of those lines, fold it over, pick it up and finger press it if it's all natural fibers, or press it with an iron. Fold the tuck in, then fold both pieces back, and it's so much easier on doing a 1/4 inch tuck if you have a 1/4 inch foot, such as I have here, with an edge stitching guide on it, so I can make a perfect 1/4 inch seam. And then I open it up And there is a tuck. Now I'm going to go ahead and make all of these tucks, and then I'm going to fold the tucks down and do a feather stitch on top of those tucks to get exactly the same look as I have over here. You want your feathers to all be feathering in the same direction, so be sure if you sew one row from the bottom to the top, you sew each row that way. Of course, you can also mirror image it. But we're going to sew this feather stitch right on top of that line of stitching that I just made the tuck. Isn't this beautiful? And I also have a stabilizer under here anytime I'm working on a batiste fabric. So you see how easy it is to reproduce techniques on these beautiful antique clothes that we can do when we can reproduce new quote-unquote antiques today. All right, here we drew all the lines on as I've just shown you. Now, here it is all finished, and release tucks mean that you just stitch down so far and then stop stitching. So here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 release tucks, just like my little antique garment, and then the feather stitching has been stitched right on top of that, and you see we really can produce an antique technique that's just as pretty as the garments that were done about 100 years ago, maybe even 130 or 140 years ago. And now I have a beautiful hand embroidered stitch to share with you. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today Wendy Schoen. Wendy is the designer of Petite Pochette patterns. She is a regular contributor to So Beautiful magazine, and she teaches at the Martha Pullen School of Art Fashion. Wendy has studied both in Portugal and at the Royal School of Needlework in London. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Martha. I brought with me some cute little projects that I've worked in the past featuring fil terre. Now, fil terre is this little stitch right in the middle of that heart. If you can see, it looks like a little checkerboard. Now, I also brought this bonnet, which has a lot of fil terre on it. But all of this area on the edge of the sash, on the edge of the bonnet, on the back of the bonnet is all fil terre. So I want to talk to you about fil terre today. Now, fil terre is a pulled thread and a counted thread stitch. Now this is, when I say counted thread, I mean you're working over the same number of threads on the top as well as on the bottom to create this lovely grid. So let me go ahead and show you how it's done. We're going to begin with the largest weave fabric I could find because I want you to be sure to see what I'm doing. Now, the only problem I'm going to have with this fabric is I won't be able to tug it as well as it needs to be. So I'm going to keep on reinforcing that. I'm going to begin by putting in a waist knot and a long thread end because I want to be sure to work over that thread as I create my grid. I'm going to be taking a back stitch. Let's just say this is A. I'm going to stitch down the same number of threads into B on the same row of fabric, of grain rather. Then I'm going to come back up at A, and this is B, I forgot to mention. So now B will be here in the exact same place. Now, ordinarily, I would take and pull my thread very, very tautly so that it actually bundles the fabric threads together. The next stitch is going to emerge at the new A, which is going to be the same number of threads over. Let's see if I can get, there we go, right there. And the same number of threads down. So this is how we work. I think I might have missed the thread, so I'm going to fix it right now before I go any further. This is how we work the stitch on the vertical rows. In other words, these are our horizontal rows, but we're stitching them vertically. So we're going to do the entire grid across so that you have all of your vertical stitches in place. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is my grid as I have worked it. All one direction, each stitch sharing a common opening or a common hole, whatever you want to call it. Remember, we're stitching in between the fabric threads. We're not piercing any fabric threads at all. So you're relegated to just whatever your grid pattern is established. Okay, now to do the next set of series of stitches, I'm going to invert my work or rotate it one turn. And now I'm going to work the stitches in the opposite direction. So these are going to be worked exactly the same way. A to B, A to C. C will be the next spot. So this is going to be the next position of the stitch. Remember, all of these should be pulled very, very tightly. Unfortunately, I can't show you that, but I'm sure you can use your imagination to try to visualize what it'll look like. Okay, so I'm going to work all of these stitches across, all of these stitches back and back and back until I actually reach the end. And then this is what it looks like when it's completely stitched. Now, I always tell my students, if you can count your threads, you have not pulled it well enough. So obviously I have not pulled mine well enough, and I told you what the reason was. In order to tie off on fill-to-ray, you can either take a few little stitches on the side, or you can bring the thread to the back and actually tie off inside one of the openings with a slip knot. Because fill-to-ray is a counted thread stitch, I usually put some sort of border or bordering or boundary, whatever you want to call it, around the outer edge just to encase it, and that's always the best place to tie on and off. So I really hope that you get some high-powered magnification and get to work on fill-to-ray. Now, one thing I did leave out is I wanted to go ahead and tell you about the threads that you should use. You want to use a cotton thread that is sturdy enough to tug, but not too heavy to fill in the openings. And then, of course, you'll want to use a tapestry needle, something with a blunt tip. So go ahead and try it.
Wendy, thank you so very much. That beautiful stitch and these beautiful garments, I thank you for being here. And now I would like to share with you a piece from my vintage collection. I have something very special to share today. This particular christening dress is from Lezette Thomason's family and have a wonderful story to read and some other wonderful things to share. This is the history of the christening gown. Catherine Reese Auden was christened in this gown April 21st, 2009 at St. David's Episcopal Church. Elizabeth Catherine Easterly Auden, Katie's mother, wore the gown in 1977. She was born in 1976 and was christened in the Presbyterian Church. The gown was found in a trunk. Now let me just share with you this beautiful picture of Catherine Reese Auden. That's Lezette's great niece who wore this gown, and the gown has a more interesting story to it. The gown was found in a trunk at the home of Mary Callie Brown Reese, Lezette Thomason's grandmother, following her death in 1976. Elizabeth was the first baby to wear the gown since Mary Callie Brown Reese, the second child of 4, born to John Abernathy and Ellen Louise Isom Brown. Although it's possible that all 4 children wore the gown, there's a family photograph of Callie sitting in her mother's lap wearing the gown. Now, the christening blanket, which I have here, is new and was made by Lezette Thomason. It's Swiss flannel lined in Swiss batiste and edged with entredot and antique laces. The rose's insertion signifies that the rose is the national flower of both the United States of America and the United Kingdom. The lace with the dragon shield on the lace represents St. George, patron saint of England. The A was done on Lezette's embroidery machine. The other embroidery is by hand. Now, this is a beautiful little christening towel also, which has the baby's name, the date, and the church where she was baptized. Lezette mentions that she purchased the antique laces, the rose laces, from Martha Pullen more than 15 years ago. Lezette and I have been friends and working together for nearly the whole time that I have been in business, and I do so appreciate Lezette's bringing this wonderful family treasure. And you see, you can have this kind of treasury too. This is what heirloom sewing is all about, this beautiful baby, and you're passing this down for generations. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today. I would absolutely love to invite you to come back next time.